Hey everyone, and welcome to the show. You know how sometimes you think you've got someone all figured out, like, what makes them tick? And then bam, they do something that just totally throws you for a loop.
It's like, whoa, where did that come from?
Yeah, exactly. Like you thought you knew them, but clearly you were missing something. And it can be
Yeah.
like a bit of a wake-up call, right?
It can be a big one for sure.
So today we're going to dive deep into this whole idea of reading people, like what it actually takes to understand someone beyond just like, surface level stuff.
It's a fascinating topic, and it's something we all do, whether we realize it or not. We're constantly trying to interpret the actions and motivations of others.
Right. It's like we're all amateur detectives in a way.
Exactly.
So for this deep dive, we've gathered insights from a whole bunch of sources like psychology, behavioral science, even some stuff on body language and microexpressions.
We're going to unpack why we often get it wrong, those misjudgments we make, and then look at some practical techniques for becoming better at this whole reading people thing.
Yeah, because let's face it, being able to understand people, it's a pretty valuable skill in just about every aspect of life, right?
Oh, absolutely. In our relationships at work, even just navigating social situations, it can make a huge difference.
So let's start with the basics. Like, why are we so bad at this sometimes? Why do we misread people so often?
Well, one of the biggest reasons is that we're all coming from our own unique perspective,
Right.
right? We've got our own experiences, our own beliefs, our own biases that color how we see the world.
So it's like we're all looking through slightly different lenses.
Exactly. And that's why you can have two people witness the same event and come away with completely different interpretations.
Like that story from one of the sources about the political joke that was told at a party.
Right. One person thought it was hilarious. The other was totally offended. Same joke, different perspectives.
Which also shows how powerful context is, right? Like what's funny in one situation could be totally inappropriate in another.
Absolutely. Context is key.
And another big mistake we often make is putting too much emphasis on what people say, their words.
Oh, yeah. We tend to focus on the verbal while ignoring the nonverbal cues, which is a huge mistake because so much of communication is actually nonverbal.
How much are we talking here?
Well, the research shows that only about 7% of communication is conveyed through the actual words we use.
7%. That's it.
Yeah, the rest comes from body language, which is about 55%,
Yeah.
and tone of voice, which makes up about 38%.
So basically we're missing like over 90% of the message if we're only paying attention to what's being said.
Exactly. And that's why we can't just take words at face value. We have to look at the whole picture, the body language, the tone of voice, the context.
Like when someone says, I'm fine, but their body language is screaming otherwise.
Classic example. Their shoulders are slumped, their eyes are downcast, their voice is flat.
And we all know they're definitely not fine.
Not even close.
So the sources really emphasize that we have to move beyond relying on single cues or just our gut feeling.
It's about looking for patterns and clusters of behavior over time.
Like if someone is constantly fidgeting, avoiding eye contact, and speaking in a hesitant tone, that's a pretty good indicator that they might be anxious or uncomfortable.
Right. It's about putting the pieces of the puzzle together.
And speaking of cues, let's talk about the role of culture, because cultural differences can have a huge impact on how we interpret behavior.
Oh, absolutely. What's considered polite or acceptable in one culture could be totally different in another.
Like the example from the sources about eye contact in America versus Japan.
Right. In America, making direct eye contact is seen as a sign of respect and engagement. But in some Asian cultures, it can be perceived as aggressive or challenging.
So it's easy to see how misinterpretations can happen.
Especially if we're not aware of these cultural differences.
And this is where the idea of establishing a baseline comes in, right?
Yeah, exactly. We need to understand what's normal behavior for a particular individual in a particular context so we can recognize when they deviate from that norm.
Like in the job interview example, someone who's normally outgoing and confident might seem nervous and withdrawn.
But that doesn't necessarily mean they're not qualified for the job. They might just be reacting to the pressure of the situation.
So establishing that baseline helps us separate the signal from the noise, so to speak.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges of objectivity, the importance of nonverbal cues, and the role of culture. Now, let's dig into the driving force behind all human behavior motivation.
Everyone acts for a reason, even if that reason isn't always obvious.
So how do we even begin to understand these hidden motivations?
Well, one of the most fascinating concepts we came across is Carl Jung's idea of the shadow.
The shadow, what's that?
It's basically the parts of ourselves that we reject or repress, those aspects of our personality that we deem unacceptable or undesirable.
Like our fears, our insecurities, our anger.
Exactly. These are the things we try to hide from the world and even from ourselves.
But they don't just disappear, do they?
No, they lurk in the shadows of our unconscious mind, and they can influence our behavior in subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways.
And this leads to the idea of shadow projection, right?
Exactly. It's when we unconsciously attribute our own shadow qualities onto other people.
So, for example, someone who is secretly insecure about their own intelligence might constantly criticize others for being stupid.
That's a classic example. They're projecting their own insecurity onto someone else.
So the things we judge most harshly in others might actually be reflections of our own hidden struggles.
That's a powerful insight, isn't it?
It is. Makes you think twice about those knee-jerk judgments we all make.
And it also highlights the importance of self-awareness. The more we understand our own shadow, the less likely we are to project it onto others.
Now, another interesting lens for understanding motivation is the concept of the inner child.
This is the idea that many of our adult behaviors and reactions are rooted in our childhood experiences.
So those unresolved childhood wounds can continue to shape how we interact with the world.
Absolutely. And that's why someone might overreact to a seemingly minor event or have a disproportionate emotional response.
It's like they're reacting from that hurt inner child part of themselves.
Exactly. And understanding this can help us respond with more compassion and empathy.
Now let's talk about one of the most fundamental motivators, the pleasure principle.
This is the idea that we're all hardwired to seek pleasure and avoid pain.
Sounds pretty basic.
It is, but it's incredibly powerful. It drives so much of our behavior, from the food we eat to the relationships we choose.
And what's interesting is that the sources point out that the avoidance of pain is often a stronger motivator than the pursuit of pleasure.
That's a really important point.
They use the analogy of a desert road with a potential treasure chest on one side and a speeding truck on the other.
Most people would instinctively choose to avoid the truck, even if it meant missing out on the treasure.
It's self-preservation, right?
Exactly. The drive to avoid pain is often more immediate and visceral than the desire for potential reward.
Makes sense. And the sources also touch on Maslow's hierarchy of needs as another framework for understanding motivation.
Right. Maslow's theory suggests that we have a hierarchy of needs, starting with the most basic physiological needs like food and shelter.
And as those needs are met, we move up the pyramid to higher level needs, like belonging, self-esteem, and ultimately self-actualization.
Exactly. And the idea is that until those lower level needs are met, we're not going to be as motivated by those higher level needs.
Like, if you're struggling to put food on the table, you're probably not going to be focused on pursuing your creative passions.
Right. Your priorities are going to be dictated by those most pressing needs.
Now, let's talk about the ego, because the ego plays a huge role in motivation, particularly in what the sources call the defense of the ego.
The ego is all about protecting itself from feeling wrong or inadequate.
So it's constantly trying to maintain a sense of self-worth.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it does this by employing a whole range of defense mechanisms.
Defense mechanisms, what are some examples?
Well, there's denial, where we simply refuse to acknowledge reality.
Like the smoker who insists that cigarettes aren't really that bad for them?
Exactly. Then there's rationalization, where we create excuses for our behavior to make it seem more acceptable.
Like the classic sour grapes analogy.
Right? The fox, who can't reach the grapes, decides they were probably sour anyway.
Makes him feel better about not getting them.
Exactly. Then there's displacement, where we redirect our emotions onto a less threatening target.
Like yelling at your spouse after a frustrating day at work.
Right? Or kicking the dog when you're angry at your boss.
Not cool, but we've all been there.
Then there's projection, where we attribute our own unwanted qualities onto others.
Like the cheater who constantly accuses their partner of being unfaithful.
Right. They're projecting their own guilt and infidelity onto someone else.
Then there's reaction formation, where we behave in a way that's opposite to our true feelings. Like the homophobic politician who is later revealed to be gay.
That's a classic example. They're overcompensating for their own internal conflict.
Then there's regression, where we revert to childlike behavior when we're stressed or threatened. Like throwing a tantrum when we don't get our way.
And finally, there's sublimation, where we channel our unacceptable impulses into more socially acceptable outlets.
Like the aggressive person who becomes a boxer.
Exactly. So all of these defense mechanisms are ways that the ego tries to protect itself from anxiety and maintain a sense of self-worth.
And recognizing these mechanisms in action can be really helpful in understanding people's behavior.
Absolutely. It gives us a glimpse into their underlying motivations and fears.
All right, let's move on to a different form of communication. Now, body language. The sources emphasize that our bodies often reveal more than our words.
Oh yeah, body language is a powerful form of nonverbal communication, and it's often more truthful than our carefully crafted words.
So what are some key things to look for?
Well, one of the most fascinating areas is microexpressions. These are fleeting facial expressions that last for just a fraction of a second.
Like a quick flash of anger or disgust?
Exactly. They're involuntary, and they often betray our true feelings even when we're trying to hide them.
So it's like our face is leaking information.
In a way, yes. And Paul Ekman's research identified 6 universal emotions that are expressed through microexpressions: happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, and disgust.
So if we can learn to recognize these microexpressions, we can get a better sense of what someone is really feeling.
Exactly. And it's not just the face. Our entire body communicates our posture, our gestures, our movements.
So what are some of the things our body language can tell us?
Well, for example, when we're feeling confident and comfortable, we tend to take up more space. We expand our posture.
Like standing tall with our shoulders back.
Exactly. But when we're feeling threatened or insecure, we tend to contract our body. We make ourselves smaller.
Like hunching over or crossing our arms.
Right. And our movements can also be very telling.
Like leaning in during a conversation versus leaning back.
Exactly. Leaning in shows interest and engagement, while leaning back can signal disinterest or discomfort.
And then there are all those little self-soothing gestures that we do when we're feeling anxious or under pressure.
Like touching our face, rubbing our neck, fiddling with our hair.
These are called pacifying behaviors, right?
Exactly. They're our body's way of trying to calm ourselves down when we're feeling stressed.
So if someone is constantly touching their face or adjusting their clothing, it could be a sign that they're feeling nervous or uncomfortable.
It's definitely something to pay attention to.
Okay, so we've got all these individual verbal and nonverbal cues, but the sources emphasize that truly reading people is about putting it all together.
It's about observing the whole person in context.
And it's about recognizing that everyone has their own unique baseline behavior.
Exactly. So what might be a sign of deception in one person could be perfectly normal for another.
And one of the biggest red flags is incongruence between someone's words and their body language.
Right, when what they're saying doesn't match up with how they're acting.
Like saying you're not angry, but clenching your jaw and avoiding eye contact.
Exactly. That's a pretty clear sign that something else is going on.
And the sources also highlight the importance of mirroring how we tend to unconsciously mimic the behavior of people we like or agree with.
So if you're having a conversation with someone and they're mirroring your body language, it could be a sign that they're feeling rapport with you.
But if they're not mirroring you, it could indicate a lack of connection or even resistance.
It's a subtle but powerful cue.
And another interesting point from the sources is about paying attention to the energy dynamics within a group.
It's not always the person with the loudest voice or the highest title who holds the real power.
So it's about observing who people are gravitating towards, who they're deferring to.
Exactly. Those subtle cues can reveal the true social hierarchy.
And as we've said before, context is everything.
We can't interpret any behavior in isolation. We have to consider the situation, the relationship between the individuals, the cultural norms.
Now, sometimes we need to make quick judgments, and the sources touch on the idea of thin slicing.
This is our ability to make surprisingly accurate assessments based on very brief observations.
Like that art expert who could instantly spot a forgery.
Exactly. Or Gottman's research, where he could predict with high accuracy whether a couple would stay together based on just a few minutes of observing their interactions.
So our gut feeling can be surprisingly accurate sometimes.
It can be, but it's important to remember that it's just a starting point.
We still need to gather more information and look for supporting evidence.
Exactly. Thin slicing is more of a hypothesis that needs to be tested.
Now, beyond body language, the sources also explore how we can decode words' appearance and even our environment to gain insights into people.
Starting with words, the words we choose can reveal a lot about our personality, our emotional state, and even our intentions.
Like how the frequency of using first-person pronouns can be correlated with self-focus or narcissism.
And the use of negative emotion words can be linked to neuroticism or anxiety.
And even the choice of we versus I can be telling.
Right, we suggests a more collectivist mindset, while I indicates a more individualistic approach.
And it's not just the words themselves, but also the way we structure our sentences, the tone we use, the level of formality.
All of these linguistic cues can provide subtle insights into the speaker's inner world.
And then there's our appearance, how we dress and groom ourselves.
Our clothing choices can communicate our identity, our status, our values, even our personality traits.
Like the classic example of the power suit.
Right. It projects an image of confidence and authority.
And even something as simple as the colors we wear can have an impact.
Absolutely. Certain colors are associated with certain emotions and personality traits.
So our appearance is definitely a form of nonverbal communication.
It's how we present ourselves to the world.
And then there's our environment, our homes, our offices, our cars.
Our surroundings can be seen as extensions of ourselves. They reflect our preferences, our values, our personalities.
Like the person who has a perfectly organized and minimalist home,
That might suggest a need for control and order.
while the person with a cluttered and eclectic home might be more creative and free-spirited.
Exactly. And Gosley's research on the psychology of stuff is fascinating.
He categorizes our possessions as identity claims, feeling regulators, and behavioral residue,
Identity claims are objects that we use to communicate who we are to the world.
like diplomas, awards, trophies.
Feeling regulators are objects that help us manage our emotions.
Like photos of loved ones or sentimental items.
And behavioral residue is the traces of our past behavior that are left behind in our environment.
Like the piles of books on our nightstand or the empty coffee cups on our desk.
All of these objects can provide clues about the person who inhabits that space.
And in today's digital world, we can't forget about online behavior.
Social media could be a treasure trove of information about people's personalities, values, and interests.
Even though people often present an idealized version of themselves online,
True, but their true selves still tend to shine through in the content they share, the groups they join, the way they interact with others.
so far we focus mostly on passive observation, but the sources also highlight the power of active observation, using questions to gain insight into people.
Asking the right questions can be incredibly revealing.
But it's not about asking just any questions. It's about asking open-ended, thought-provoking questions.
Exactly, questions that encourage people to reflect and share their inner world.
Like instead of asking, what do you do for work, ask what gets you excited about your job.
Or instead of asking, what are your hobbies? Ask what activities make you lose track of time.
The sources provide a whole toolkit of these kinds of questions.
Like asking about someone's biggest splurges versus their most diligent savings habits.
Or what they would rescue from a burning building.
Or what they would do if they won the lottery.
Or what advice they would give their younger selves.
All of these questions can elicit surprisingly profound and revealing answers.
And they can help us understand people on a much deeper level.
Absolutely.
Finally, let's touch on the topic of lie detection.
This is a tricky one because, as the sources point out, most people are not very good at detecting lies.
Even trained professionals.
That's right. Relying on those classic tells like shifty eyes or fidgeting is often unreliable.
So what's the best approach?
Well, the sources suggest that effective lie detection is more about observing the overall interaction and looking for inconsistencies.
Like changes in their baseline behavior.
Exactly, or contradictions in their story.
And using open-ended questions and strategic information withholding can be helpful.
Right. It gives the person more opportunities to trip themselves up.
And introducing an element of surprise can also be effective.
Like asking an unexpected question or changing the subject abruptly.
This can disrupt a rehearsed narrative and make it harder for them to maintain the lie. So it's really about being a keen observer, paying attention to both the verbal and nonverbal cues, and looking for those subtle signs of deception.
And remember, even the best lie detectors are not always right.
So it's important to trust our gut feeling, but also to be aware of its limitations.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into reading people, it's clear that it's a complex and nuanced skill.
It's about being aware of our own biases.
It's about paying attention to both the verbal and nonverbal cues.
It's about understanding the power of context and individual differences.
And it's about being willing to ask questions and really listen to the answers.
It's a lifelong journey of learning and discovery.
And the more we learn about how to read people, the more effectively we can navigate our relationships, our careers, and our lives.
Absolutely. It's a skill that can benefit us all.
So I encourage you to take some of the insights from this deep dive and start applying them in your own life.
Pay attention to the people around you. Observe their behavior. Listen to their words and ask thoughtful questions.
You might be surprised by what you learn.
And remember, understanding people is not about judging them. It's about connecting with them on a deeper level.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating world of reading people.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep observing, keep learning, and keep connecting.